All right. Hello there. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to the channel. My name is James, and here at 20th and 21st Movies, we are about all things cinema. Today, I'm going to share with you my thoughts on a recent release from the Criterion Collection on 4K Ultra HD starring James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart. Just an absolutely fantastic film from Raoul Walsh. It is called The Roaring Twenties. So this is a really interesting film. I always like to go back to classic Hollywood. This is from 1939. So I'm going to come on here and share with you my thoughts on this title, on this time change Sunday. Daylight savings time began just a few hours ago here in the United States. For those states that observe it, I believe Arizona and Hawaii do not observe daylight savings time, but for the rest of the 48 United States, we pretty much spring ahead an hour and fall back in the fall. But when I come back on the other side of this, I'm going to share with you my thoughts from my car in between church services on this release from the Criterion Collection, The Roaring Twenties, starring two of Hollywood's biggest luminaries, James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart. Let's do this. All right, so I'm sharing with you my thoughts on this release from the Criterion Collection called The Roaring Twenties. This is from director Raoul Walsh. And Raoul Walsh also has another title in the Criterion Collection that I highly recommend that also stars Humphrey Bogart. It's called High Sierra. Now, this one is from 1941. You'll see it has Ida Lupino in the top billing and Humphrey Bogart, right there behind her there. And that's because at the time of the Roaring Twenties in 1939 and High Sierra in 1941, Humphrey Bogart was still coming up in the ranks of actors in Hollywood. He was not yet an A-list leading man at that point. He had not worked his way into that mix as of yet. At that time, James Cagney was the bigger star. So you had James Cagney and Priscilla Lane who were getting top billing, and it was also starring Humphrey Bogart. But it wasn't until, it wasn't long after these movies that Humphrey Bogart would appear in, of course, The Maltese Falcon, which got this great 4K release. That came out, I think, last year. Amazing release in 1941. And then, of course, the role that he is probably most famous for, Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca in 1942. So by that time, Humphrey Bogart had established himself as a leading man in Hollywood, and he was, went on to be one of the world's biggest and Hollywood's biggest classic stars. But today I'm talking about the Roaring Twenties. And this film came out in 1939. And, of course, 1939 was an absolutely epic year in film. You had so many incredible films that came out in that year. It's one of the biggest years, single years of film in film history. You have films like Gone with the Wind, which actually won Best Picture that year. It came out in 1939. Stagecoach, which is in the Criterion Collection, came out that year. The Wizard of Oz, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So many amazing films came out in 1939. So, Only Angels Have Wings, starring Cary Grant. So just film after film after film came out in 1939. You see here the top grossing movies of 1939 were, of course, The Wizard of Oz, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and Gone with the Wind, as you see on the screen here. And then a title called Nino Chica, which I had never even heard of. But let me know in the comment section if you've heard of that film and what you think of that film. But yeah, those are some of the films that came out the same year as the Roaring Twenties. So of course, the Roaring Twenties, you see here James Cagney and Priscilla Lane get top billing. The Roaring Twenties also starring Humphrey Bogart. Gladys George played Panama Smith, which was a really neat role in this film. Really great supporting actor. Jeffrey Lynn played Lloyd Hart, who was the love interest of Priscilla Lane's Gene Sherman in this movie. But I really enjoyed this film, The Roaring Twenties. This is an example of classic Hollywood. It deals with a pretty significant historical event. And that's one thing I really like about watching classic films like this is getting a little bit of a history lesson, because this is taking place during a very interesting time in American history here in the United States. As I'm fumbling with my mouse, it's upside down. That's why it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. But you're looking at this film taking place. It's called The Roaring Twenties. So this film opens up toward really the last day of World War I. World War One, you have Humphrey Bogart. His character is George Halley. James Cagney is playing Eddie Bartlett. They're on the battlefield, and they just get word that World War One has come to an end, that there has been an armistice, and we are now going into a time of peace. We're also going into a time of prohibition in the United States. So the soldiers are coming home from the battlefield, and we're also at a point in history where the United States institutes prohibition, where all booze and alcohol was basically considered illegal for 13 years, from 1920 to 1933. So this film that came out in 1939, The Roaring Twenties, came out 6 years after prohibition was repealed. And so it takes place during this period after World War One, going into prohibition. And basically, you have James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart, who are involved in organized crime selling alcohol illegally. So you have on the back of this case, it just says the Roaring Twenties, ripped from the headlines of the turbulent era between the Great War and the Great Depression, which is awesome. I mean, just seeing the history in this film through the newsreels and is really very educational, because you're learning about World War One, you're learning about the 1920s, the Great Depression, Prohibition. So it just places you in that time and that era and these characters who are operating in it. So that's what I like about films like this. It's not only entertaining, but it places you in a real historical place and just gives you a little bit of perspective of, hey, what was going on during this time? So it's during the Great War and the Great Depression. This dynamic, nostalgia tinged crime drama balances Tommy gun action with epic historical sweep. Legends James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart star as army buddies whose fortunes rise and fall as their fates intersect. First in a foxhole on the front lines of World War One, then in Manhattan's Prohibition era underworld. So they're in the criminal underworld, pushing alcohol illegally in these little speakeasies and these underground places where that was going on. Directed by Hollywood master Raoul Walsh and based on a story by prolific journalist turned screenwriter and producer Mark Hellinger, The Roaring Twenties brought to a close the celebrated Warner Brothers gangster cycle of the 1930s, and it remains one of the greatest and most influential crime films of all time. This is a fantastic release from the Criterion Collection. You see here an article from the time Prohibition and being the new era in the United States. This is actually an article from across the pond in Britain, talking about, hey, the United States has just instituted Prohibition in 1920. It's a new era in the United States. You see here a picture here, no booze sold here. So just fascinating stuff. Let me just come out of this for a second, and I'll show you the case here of the Roaring Twenties. This is the 4K Ultra HD edition. On the inside, look at what you get. You get here. This is a very fascinating scene. I won't say at what point. Just let you watch the film for yourself. But this is a very profound scene, and Priscilla Lane delivers a wonderful line in this scene. But this is just a fantastic point in the movie. You have two discs. You have the 4K Ultra HD. You have the Blu-ray disc. The 4K has the movie in 4K and Dolby Vision and the commentary. This Blu-ray disc has the movie, has the commentary, and the supplements on here. So just fantastic. With this little fold out here, of course, you get this fold out, has the Roaring Twenties here on the back there. You have a nice little essay from Mark Atch called Into the Past. You have the cast here, which is just fantastic. Directed by Raoul Walsh. Wonderful. And it says about the master, The Roaring Twenties is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.37 to 1. This new digital master was created from the 35 millimeter nitrate original camera negative, in addition to a safety fine grain for some sections, with both elements scanned and restored in 4K resolution. So there's a Dolby Vision grade on here, and I'll just, spoiler alert, it looks fantastic. It looks really good, folks. I love these black and white films with these new 4K restorations. Great work that's being done in the film preservation world these days. But let's go back here to what I am presenting here as far as some slides. The actors here are huge in this movie, as is the case in most films. But in this case, you have powerhouses James Cagney, you have Priscilla Lane, and you have Humphrey Bogart. These are your three people who are really driving the power of this story. They're just absolutely amazing in their roles, and they each have their unique aspects to them. James Cagney, he is, coming back from the war. He is, having trouble finding work, obviously, and that leads to him finding work in less than legal circumstances, pushing alcohol during the prohibition industry. You know, During the prohibition era, you have Priscilla Lane, who is a singer trying to make her way in the world, and you have Humphrey Bogart, who was also in the war with James Cagney's character, and he's coming back to the United States, and he has an edge to him that is really something to see in this movie. I mean, this character played by Humphrey Bogart is vicious, and you see that in this film. He's just cold and heartless, And you have Miss George here, and you have Lynn here. Again, I will go to this go in here and get these names because I these names are escaping me. Priscilla Lane played Jean Sherman. So let me go back here. Let me get these full names. James Cagney, of course, he played Eddie Bartlett. You have Humphrey Bogart playing George Halley. Priscilla Lane played Gene Sherman. So I get these names mixed up sometimes. So I do apologize. But these are your three main characters. And then two really big supporting characters. Panama Smith played Gladys George. She was sort of a a check on James Cagney's character, just trying to keep him in line, trying to help him understand the reality of what he perceived to be a relationship between him, his character Eddie Bartlett, and Jean, played by Priscilla Lane. Of course, Panama Smith tried to be his conscience to help him understand. This relationship isn't what you think it is, but he wouldn't listen. So you had Gladys George here playing Panama Smith. She had a pretty interesting story in terms of the direction that her life went in that I just read a little bit about that I found pretty interesting. And you have Lloyd Hart is played by Jeffrey Lynn here. So two wonderful supporting actors here. And of course, you have James Cagney's character. He's back from military service in World War II, having trouble getting his original job back, having trouble getting any kind of work. And so that leads him to, finding alternate ways to make money illegally. Gets involved here with Priscilla Lane's character, Gene Sherman, and of course a partnership with Humphrey Bogart there. So really, really good stuff is the Roaring Twenties. Now, I think this film is absolutely fantastic as a gangster film. If you like films like Goodfellas, The Godfather, if you like those types of films, you're gonna like probably if you're into classic films, you're gonna like this film here as well. It's the Roaring Twenties, and it is a great example of a classic Hollywood film that's based on a gangster story, and it has a real historical context that is behind it. And just seeing that history played out before you is really one of the fascinating things about this particular film. Now, in terms of how this film looks on 4K Ultra HD, I'll tell you, it looks really, really nice. It's an example of another black and white classic film that's been restored, put on a 4K disc with a nice Dolby Vision grade, and it looks wonderful. I mean, that Dolby Vision really gives you some nice contrast. The blacks, the grayscale is defined really well. You get some nice definition. Of course, you're going to have some soft spots in different parts of the film, which is to be expected. But overall, you're getting a lot of nice detail and information in the image. It just comes across clean and sharp, and just a beautiful, beautiful presentation of this black and white film, and just an example of another great restoration effort done to bring one of these classic films to life. So from a video standpoint, it looks absolutely fantastic. The audio is an uncompressed monaural soundtrack, and it sounds very good. Now, from a special feature standpoint, this release is a bit light, which has been something I've seen from a number of Criterion releases of late. But you do get the features that are on here are quite good, but you just only get a couple of them. Of course, you get the audio commentary, which is nice to have. So, in a release that's a little light on the features, if it at least has an audio commentary, that plays and gives you information about an insight about the film, that sort of balances it a little bit, but still I would like a little bit more features. But the audio commentary on here is quite good. And you get two main features. One is an interview with critic Gary Giddens, which is very good because he talks about the history of gangster films and this picture's role in that. So that's very informative. And then you also get an excerpt from a 1973 interview with director Raoul Walsh, which is also quite good. It runs, I think, about 5 minutes. So and that's pretty much it. You get, of course, the essay by Mark Ash that's in the insert here. And those are your special features. So it's a little bit light on the features, but the presentation on and it is why I would definitely recommend it on a 50% off sale. So I would definitely recommend picking this up on the upcoming, what we hope to be a July Barnes& and Noble sale. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on The Roaring Twenties from director Raoul Walsh, another fine film from him in the Criterion Collection, along with High Sierra here. These are both amazing films that I highly recommend picking up in an upcoming Criterion Collection sale. But The Roaring Twenties is another great addition to Criterion. It comes in at spine number 1208. It runs at 106 minutes, so it doesn't hold you very long. It's an hour 46 minutes, so it's under 2 hours, and it's a really good watch. And it's awesome to see these classic Hollywood stars, James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart, doing their thing on the silver screen, looking fantastic in high definition, 4K high definition. So definitely get high marks for that. But definitely pick it up on an upcoming sale. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of The Roaring Twenties. Let me know what some of your classic favorites are from this era. And let me know what are some of your favorite films from the year 1939. There's so many great films from that year. Let me know some of your favorites in the comment section below. And as always, thanks for watching. And we look forward to seeing you next time at the movies. I got to get in here and get ready for production for the second service of the day. So I was able to fit this in. So this is called multitasking at its best. Have a great Sunday and get adjusted to the time change. Peace.